Alrighty, hello everybody. How's everyone doing? Hope you had a nice day. I am here tonight. My name is Nick Lapoma, owner of Curve Breakers, and I am here to talk about preparing for the March digital SAT. I have a little bit of a presentation. There also is the ability to ask a question. So there's a Q&A. So if anyone does have a question, of course, feel free to throw that in there whenever you do have it. I will, of course, just stop what I'm doing and answer that. I love doing these kind of things. So I'm always happy to answer questions and just make sure everyone's on the same page. So let's get into it. Just share my screen here. Hopefully everyone can see that. Awesome. All right, so a little bit about myself. I won't waste too much time on this. I am once again the owner of Curve Breakers. We work with about 40 local schools on SAT, ACT prep programs. I started doing SAT prep in actually in college when I was 19 years old, working for Kaplan. And then since that time, I worked for a number of other companies before starting Curve Breakers in 2013. So we're on 10 years now, which is amazing. And with the digital SAT coming out, there's a lot of concern around that and just like how that works and preparing for it and so on and so forth has definitely changed a lot. So hopefully tonight I'll give you guys some information on how to prepare for that, what's on it, what to expect, how to approach it. And like I said, if there are any questions about that, feel free to just jump in. And I have a lot of slides, so I'm gonna try to move through them quickly. So if I do go too quickly through something, feel free to, just throw up a hand or put a question in the chat. So what are we going to go over? The digital SAT format and structure, the digital SAT tools, the changes to the sections, the diagnostic testing that students can do, some study resources, a little bit of a study plan with about a little less than 8 weeks before the test. We kind of came up with a plan for you guys if you are studying, especially if you're students studying on their own or with maybe just books and online resources. We have all of that for you as well. And then some things that we do that can help you guys. So the test is still out of 1600. This is the things that have not changed about the test. Most people are familiar with that scoring for a brief amount of time, I guess brief being 10 years. They changed it to 2400, which confused everybody. No one liked that. So now they're back to 1600. They've been back since the last version of the test. And that's good because that gives people a level of comfort understanding the scores. What I would say about that is, a lot of times, I talk to tons of parents, students, school administrators, so on and so forth. The scores that parents got that were good at that time are different than they are now. Like basically they've inflated the SAT scores a little bit. And as you probably know, colleges are all looking for wildly high scores. There's other reasons for that, but one of the main reasons is that the scores are a little bit inflated. So for example, like when I was in high school, one of my good friends got a 1270 on the SAT, which at the time was very good. And he got into Boston College with that. Without question, right? He was accepted and attended. And it's just kind of funny because now that score is probably over 200 points off of what they would expect a student to submit, right? So, things have changed a lot even in that 20 years since I was in high school. And even especially over the past, 3 or 4 years since, COVID and everything like that, it's really kind of spiraled out of control and the expectations are extremely high. That said, there are many schools that, are looking for 1300. So it's not like you have to get a 1500 on the score. But I think parents in their mind remember getting an 1100 and getting into a good college. And that is kind of no longer the case. So, good or bad, the scoring has kind of changed in that respect. One other thing that has remained the same is that the math questions are largely similar, which is great. They still have the grid-ins, which students always remember, are the ones where you have to put in a student directed response. So basically, instead of picking a multiple choice answer, you have to actually type in now, type because it's on a computer. type in a number. So it could be any number. And that is the reason for that is it eliminates the opportunity to really guess. So if you have multiple choice and you can kind of eliminate a few, maybe you have a 50-50, but if it's, 57.2 is the answer, no one's ever going to randomly guess 57.2. I mean, someone might, but the chances are extremely slim. So that's why they have that. The reading comprehension questions, and that's really what's changed the most. I'm actually going to pull up some digital SAT questions later for you guys, just so you could see and hopefully kind of give everyone a little bit of an idea of like how the strategy and approach has changed. But the reading and English parts have totally changed. That is totally overhauled, and the reason for that is on the digital format. The test is now given on a computer. They don't want to have the long passages anymore, where students have to read through something that is a page and a half long. It's very hard to do with like a test on a computer, and then also it's just much more appealing to students now to have shorter passages and not have the long-winded things that students have to read through. And I think what they did was, College Board who runs the SAT, they went around and they asked parents, students, probably teachers, school people, and they said, what are the things that you don't like about the SAT? And what do people say? Oh, it's too long. I don't like being, strictly timed. I don't like the math without a calculator. I don't like this. I don't like that. And they went in and changed all those things. And the result of that is the new digital test. So it's more aligned with what students would expect to see. It's still a standardized test. So that doesn't mean it's like easier. I think that's kind of a negative rumor that has gone around. It's like the new digital SAT is easier. I'll explain how that rumor has developed. It's not easier. It's still a very challenging test, but at the same time, it's, I would say, fairer and less painful, right? So instead of the test being over 3 hours, it's now 2 hours and 14 minutes, which no student is going to complain about chopping 45 minutes off the test. Like that's a good thing for the kids. And any students are watching this, it's great that you can take a shorter test. And I'm all for it. I think the new test is 1,000% better than the old test. It's better than the ACT. I still like the ACT. Plenty of students are taking it. That said, I've heard from parents already that ACT test sites are getting closed on Long Island for what they call it, saturation. So saturation would be when there's too many students taking the test and they don't have enough spots, but that doesn't make any sense, right? If they close the site, that means they don't have enough students and they're trying to consolidate. So that's what they're saying, but I think that the new digital SAT has been so well received by students that it's, it's kind of taking over. So what has changed? We now have the app-based adaptive testing. Like I said, the 1 hour shorter test time. These are all the good things, except for the last one. There's 2 sections instead of 4, but each section has 2 modules, so you're still doing 4 parts to the test. The calculator is now permitted on all math questions, so there is an integrated calculator. It's called Desmos. Some students that I've worked with have told me that they use it in school. Other students have never heard of it. It's very important that students know how to use this. They still can use their old calculator, TI 89 or whatever they use in school, but the integrated calculator is, in my opinion, the best one to use. I don't know if I would go as far as say a student should like ditch their calculator and learn an entirely new calculator if they have no comfort with it, but I think the students that have started using it have seen that it's extremely easy because you can type. So because you're on a computer, you can type like y equals 6x plus 7, and it will then show you a graph. Whereas on the handheld calculator, you have to push more buttons and it's a little bit clunkier. But to each their own, like whatever students feel most comfortable with is fine. Like I said earlier, much shorter reading passages, which is great. Another good thing, the results will be available more quickly. So they're saying days, which in the past was really long, and then they got it down to 2 weeks. So previously it was 2 weeks it took to get your score back. So now they're saying days. So I'm assuming that just means shorter than that. So hopefully like single digits, like maybe it'll take a week, or maybe you'll get it instantaneously. I doubt that, but they said days, so that'll be good. The one big negative, and this is my one major complaint about the digital SAT, is that they have eliminated what's called the QAS report. The QAS report is basically after, say, taking the marked SAT, you could pay a few extra dollars. I think it was like $30, something in that range, and you could actually review your test. And that was huge. That was important, right? I have a big screen over here in my office. I would have my students come in we put their results up on the screen and we go over it. We go over each question, we go over how they did, and it was really effective study time. If a student was doing that on their own, they could do that at home. They could go over their test, they could go over the questions, they could see what they got wrong, they could see the actual questions. That is no longer available. So the reason that they're doing that is they're saying they're reusing the questions because it's a digital adaptive test. That makes it a little harder to prepare. And I think that's overall my one major complaint. Luckily, we've solved all of these problems for you. So we have solutions for all the issues. But the fact that the students can't review their test, I think, is not good. The ACT, on the other hand, will actually mail you a packet. It won't be the packet that you actually had on the day of the test. They mail you a copy. So at least you have access to the questions. And now they email it, actually. They email you a PDF so you can go over all the questions. And as a tutor or someone runs a test prep company, we can then utilize that, go over the students' tests and help them. So that's a little bit annoying. But a lot of positive changes and one negative change, I think we'll take it. Okay, so big question is, how does this work, right? You have the two parts. So you have reading and writing and you have math. So every single student takes the same module once. So let's just use math as an example. So say myself and a random student both take module 1 of the math, and say that random student gets 90% of the questions right. They will then be routed to a harder version of module 2, right? So their module 2 will be more difficult questions. Say I'm doing the first math section, I only get, say, 50% of the right. I will be routed to an easier version of module 2. So this is the adaptive part of the test. It adapts in the middle of the math section and adapts in the middle of the reading and writing section. So basically, if you perform well, they give you harder questions. And if you perform less well, they give you easier questions. Now, next thing that everyone says, that doesn't sound fair, right? Well, the way that it works is if you get the easier set of questions, your score is going to be capped at around a 1200. So in order to get over 1200 approximately, you're going to need to get onto that harder second module. So the students are rewarded for getting those harder questions, and they're rewarded for getting those harder questions correct. So it sounds unfair, but it results in a fair score distribution. Now, the question is, why do we need this? Like, why would we even do that? That just sounds like they're complicating things. Well, the reason is that's how they've shortened the test. So previously, let's say you need to do 60 math questions for them to assess you, right? You need to do 20 easy questions, 20 medium questions, and 20 hard questions, right? Now they give you in module 1, say 5 easy, 5 medium, and 5 hard. They assess your skills, and then they give you the second module that has all of the questions that are more appropriate for your skill level. So the whole goal of the adaptive testing is to shorten the test, because that's one of the biggest complaints is this is way too long, it's too much work, too many questions. So they found this way, adaptive testing is a way to shorten it. And they do this on a lot of tests. This seems very new. It's new for the SAT, but they've been doing this on other tests for years and years, like decades, for the GRE and other major tests, licensing exams, whatever the case may be. This is a very common thing to shorten tests and make them more accessible. So it sounds a little convoluted, but it's very well established in the education community as something that is totally fine and works. And the test works exactly the same way in terms of the effectiveness. So, colleges are looking at it the same way. Kids are getting the same scores on, like, when they took the paper test and the digital test. Obviously, some will differ, right? Because the test is different, but it has the same effectiveness and efficacy. And that's what's important, right? Because if the test was watered down, then colleges may not like it. So it's not watered down at all. Now, this goes into my earlier point. Why has the rumor spread? And I hear this a lot from students, and maybe some students think this, right? The digital SAT is easier. That's because the students that are getting the easier second module, let's say on the PSAT, like, what is this? This is so easy. And that results in a lower score. So yes, if you do get a lower score, then you will have an easier test, but your score will be lower. So that's kind of good in a sense, right? If a student isn't scoring a 1400, you don't want them to get every single question wrong. Like, that's not a good feeling for a student. So in order to avoid that feeling, they route that student to easier questions that they can do, and then it feels easy and they don't hate it as much. So the students that are getting more, let's say, around the average score are not saying, wow, this test is terrible. They're saying, okay, that wasn't that bad. Doesn't mean their score is higher. It just means that they feel less negative about it. So there's a good part to that. And there's a bad part, which is that it kind of spreads a little bit of misunderstanding about how the scoring works. But the scores have come out pretty much exactly the same. Now, if there's any questions, I know that's like a lot of kind of confusing stuff. If there's any questions about that, you could throw it in the chat. So here we have a comparison between three tests: the traditional old paper and pencil SAT, the digital SAT, and the ACT. So this is where my argument about why the digital SAT has been so well received kind of comes into play. So you can see the timing. The old paper test was 3 hours plus. The ACT is about 3 hours, and then the digital SAT is only 2 hours and 14 minutes. The question number is a huge deal, right? Digital SAT, you only have to do 98 questions in those 2 hours and 14 minutes. That's because of the adaptive testing. They've really able to lower the number of questions and get the same result. On the ACT, you have to do 215 questions. So as a high school student, it's very hard for them without an analysis, diagnostic test, or someone telling them, like me guiding them, right? To say, I'd rather do a test with 215 questions than a test with 98 questions. So I think that's why the SAT right now is really going to be picking up a lot of steam. The format, has changed a little bit. So you had the 4 sections previously: reading, writing, which is grammar; math, no calculator; and math with a calculator. That was the old paper test. Now you just have the 2 sections with 2 modules. So the reading and writing, they've crunched together. So instead of having separate reading and separate grammar sections, now they've crunched those 2 together in the reading and writing section. So you have reading questions and grammar questions in the reading and writing section. On the ACT, you have 4 sections: English, math, reading, and science. So the big difference being the science part. Some students like that, and then they do really well on it, and that's a great reason for a student to be doing the ACT. And then the math is another big difference. So the result of that, the formatting of the 2 tests: on the ACT, you only have 1 math section. So that's only a quarter of the test. And on the SAT, you have 2 math sections, 2 modules, which is half the test. So SAT, 50% math; ACT is only 25% math. So if you're a student that says, I'm not really super confident in math, I don't feel that comfortable with it, you would probably prefer the ACT. And that's why students still do the ACT. The other reason that students still do it is that in many states, it's like required. Not New York, but in many other states, like in the Midwest and South, they use the ACT as like a high school graduation test. So there's a lot of states that are still like really into the ACT. But maybe that'll change, who knows? So here's a little bit more about some of the differences. Like I was saying, the separation of reading and English. I hate how they call it writing. I guess I don't want to call it grammar because it's like off-putting, because people don't like that, but it's really a grammar writing style test. You don't actually have to write anything by hand. But on the ACT, those are still separate. So 2 of the 4 sections are, reading comp and English, they call it, which is basically grammar. Like I said, now on the digital test, those are crunched together. And then the other big difference is the resources. So with the old paper and pencil test, we had countless SAT tests for kids to do. With the ACT, we have countless ACTs for kids to do that have been given out over time. With the digital SAT, there's only 4 tests in the Blue Book app. We have many more that we have in our diagnostic system, but at the same time, if a student was just doing this independently on their own, they only have those 4 tests to do, and then they're kind of out of luck. They have to start finding something online or pay for something. So that's a little bit of a problem. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to pan out. I think people definitely aren't going to like that. That's why they have to seek outside help and outside resources. So here's an example of an old reading comp question or section. So this would actually be significantly longer than this. We've only shown a portion. This would actually be 3 full columns of this long passage. And then the student would answer a multitude of questions. It would be 10 to 11 questions they would answer about that passage. So that people don't like that, right? So say you read the passage and you don't really understand that one passage, and there's 10 questions connected to that passage, right? So then as a student, you feel very negative about that. Like, okay, now I'm going to get these 10 questions wrong, and that's not a good feeling. Or you actually do get a lot of them wrong and it hurts your score, right? So now that's not the case. This is what a question would look like. So you have one passage here is actually notes that were written and one question. So it's, much simpler in the sense that, like, if you don't get one of them, not a big deal. You just move on from it, and the next one will be totally different. Whereas on the old test, the questions all related to the same passage. So if you didn't get that passage, so you're getting multiple questions in a row wrong, and then you start feeling kind of negative about it, and then you could see how that could kind of spiral into something not good for the student. And here's another example of a digital SAT question. So you have like a small paragraph, and then you have the question, and then the answer choices. So what you can see here is this is actually a vocabulary question, and vocabulary was for the most part totally removed from the old paper SAT, and now it is back. And I think that's something that people are going to catch on to and not like, because those questions were not hugely popular. Back in the day, any parents remember this, or like when I took the SAT, the vocabulary on the test was crazy. I mean, it was just wild vocabulary words that no one would ever know. And now you can see kind of the nature of the vocabulary that they're using: widespread, careful, unintended, infrequent. Those are words that most high school students probably do know or should know. So the idea is that it's more fair vocabulary instead of it being ridiculous vocabulary words that you have to study these long word lists, which was actually totally futile. Like, the test, like if you studied 10,000 words, you might not hit any of the words that are actually on the test. So people were spending all this time memorizing these crazy words, and then none of them would come on the test. I remember when I took the SAT, one word that I remembered from a vocabulary list came up on the test. So that was actually lucky. So I would say students should read, and a way to prepare and improve. Like if I struggle with reading combo, I struggle with vocabulary-based questions, stuff like that, you should read, not probably study vocabulary lists. So read, understand context, read things that are challenging, like op-ed pieces in the New York Times, or, technical magazines like The Economist or something like that. That's a great way, especially if a student is on the younger side or they have a lot of time to prepare. Start reading things. That's a totally underrated prep strategy, and it's really just good for the student overall, right? Like we all would agree, like reading more is a good thing. So, luckily they don't have the crazy vocabulary, but they do have some challenging vocabulary. This is, I would say, a little bit on the easier side. I think most people would know what those words mean, but there are some more challenging questions as well. And this is what the Blue Book app looks like. So if you did want to prepare and test yourself, which I did do this as well, you could actually go in here and make an account, download the app on College Board's website, and you can see down on the bottom, full-length practice. So you can actually sit down and do a full-length SAT and get a score. The problem is you really only get your score. They don't tell you which module you went to. They don't tell you, a lot of information about what you got wrong, or they don't really give you a plan for improvement, but at least you could see where you stand. We provide that service as well, and with much more detail, which I'll show you guys. But just wanted to note, if you do want to practice with the Blue Book app, acclimate yourself to that. I would recommend, if you're a student and you don't already have that on your computer that you download, you're going to need to take the test anyway. So most schools that I'm dealing with are installing it on kids' computers. It's also used for AP exams and stuff like that. So most kids already have it on their school issued computer. If you don't have a school issued computer, you should download it and just start playing around with it, because it's helpful in kind of understanding how it works and what's going on with that. So how is the preparation changing? The digital SAT has already been given for quite some time in Asia. They pilot tested it there. So we already have feedback from, people that we work with over there, companies that we're partnered with, so on and so forth. So what we've heard is that students that are preparing on paper, which there are paper versions of the digital SAT, you can't take it at a school or for real, but you can download it and do it at home or something like that. Students that are using that to prepare are not doing well on digital tests because it's not translating. And there's kind of this skill of using the Desmos calculator and just being, able to navigate through the app. There's tools in the app, like you can highlight things, you can cross out answer choices, you can mark a question to go back and review. There's a timer. I mean, there's a lot of things that you need to kind of get comfortable with. So, preparing for standardized tests is all about practicing. And, practice makes perfect. Repetition is hugely important on standardized tests. So without the availability of a mass number of tests, students are going to have to look elsewhere to do enough preparation to do the test. So I would recommend, if students did want to prepare, if they're preparing on their own, to do those 4 tests. and probably look for more, and we can provide that as well. So, and our tests are fully adaptive, so it's very helpful to have that at your disposal. So if someone's looking to start this process off, I would try both tests and see which one is better for you. We provide that as a free service, free diagnostic SAT, free diagnostic ACT. You know, everyone's willing to, or everyone's able to take that. We have kids from all over taking it. Doesn't mean you have to pay for anything. You could just do the test. Obviously, many people do buy services after that, but you're more than welcome to just do the test, see how you do. We do that because it's really important for the students to, you know, level set, goal set, like figure out where they need to be. So if I'm starting at this level and I want to get to this level because a certain school needs that kind of score, I kind of have an idea of how much work I would need to do to get there. Whereas I have no idea what my score is, it's gonna be very hard to make a determination, like how much time I have to spend. Do I have to take the test multiple times? Like, when should I start studying? Like, it's very hard to do that without like a diagnostic. So that's why we do that. When you're looking into taking a class or doing tutoring, anything like that, I would always stay away for anything with a guarantee. That's a marketing gimmick. No one actually ever gets their money back, or very few people. There's a million hoops you need to jump through. If you miss one homework assignment, it's void, right? So I would always look out for that. And then, you know, of course, practice makes perfect. You know, you have to do questions, time yourself. It's hugely important that I kind of point that out. So many times I speak with students and families after they've been studying maybe on their own, they had a tutor, whatever the case may be, and they don't do well on the test. And a lot of it has to do with timing, time management, and managing themselves during the test. And, you know, if you don't do a timed practice assessment, you don't do a diagnostic test, a lot of times it doesn't go that well on the real day. So that's hugely important. And any student studying, I'd recommend assessing yourself once a month, something like that. So in terms of preparing for the test, what can you do? So we released our new book on Amazon. It's been widely, you know, very well received, and it has strategies, content, practice questions, and practice tests. So anyone looking to prepare for the test as like a low cost option, you know, we're talking $26, $27. You can get this. It basically runs all of our classes. It's basically a class in a book. So, you know, it has a lot of different things in there that help you prepare for the test. So that's one thing, especially for a low cost option that can help give you more material to cover, more questions to do, and strategizing and so on and so forth. So as I told you guys earlier, I was going to give you like a little bit of a study plan. So say you wanted to prepare just totally with free things that you could find, right? This is what I would do, right? So I would take Blue Book test 1 or some other test. I would then in the next week look at that test, right? Find a few areas for improvement, right? Okay, so I didn't do well on these, you know, geometry questions, triangles, circles, whatever. Punctuation, I didn't do well on, you know, commas, semicolons, and colons, and then study those areas. So, you know, of course, you can use free resources. You can use Khan Academy. This is where classes and tutoring come in. They kind of build this all for you. And then at the end of that week, do another practice test, see if you've improved, and you kind of repeat that process over and over, right? So, but you have to, the part that a lot of people miss is that part in the middle. So you take the test, then you have to really break it down. And that's what a tutor does. That's what a class does, is like show you what you need to do to improve, guide you towards that improvement. So a lot of students miss that middle part. Like they just do test after test after test, and question after question, and they don't take the time to really think about that and kind of analyze, right? And that's where the improvement oftentimes comes most quickly. So it's kind of a cycle that you can use if you're preparing for the test, and obviously tutors and classes kind of drive you through that. So if you do want to improve your score, in a nutshell, what do you need to do? So you need to diagnose yourself. So kind of find out where you need to improve, get this kind of schedule. So build something like this for yourself, or obviously if you're doing a class, it's built for you. And then find time. That's other huge thing. Students are very busy, right? So carve out, you know, 30 minutes a day, 2 hours a week, whatever time you can carve out. Make sure you carve that out, because the students that don't have the time to really prepare aren't going to improve. And then you also have to have the strategizing, and I'm going to go over some strategizing in a second, but that's hugely important. A lot of students, you know, they just kind of do whatever they feel is best, and they don't think about like how the test really works and what would be most beneficial. So for example, like it's a basic example, there's a lot of challenging math problems that to solve algebraically are extremely challenging, right? But there's strategies that you can use, such as like plugging in a number for X or using the answer choices and plugging them back into an equation to get an answer very easily on an extremely hard question. So the students that know to do that, and that seems like kind of like obvious, but like no one does this, right? Especially during a timed assessment. Like it's like, okay, this is math. I need to start doing algebra. So to have that in your back pocket, like some ways to get answers when you don't exactly know what you're doing, is what really kind of boosts some student scores, and other students don't have that, and then their score doesn't go up as much. So the strategy is hugely important, and that's something that, you know, of course, a tutor or a company can hopefully provide. In terms of figuring out what any one person should do, people always ask me like, okay, what should my student do? What should I do if I'm a student? The answer varies from person to person. People have different learning styles, different schedules, time to prepare, different budget, different score they need, right? That would affect what I would recommend someone do, right? So if someone has a 1300 and they need a 1350, maybe they don't need that much preparation, right? But if that student with 1300 wants a 1500, that may take months, right? Some students prepare for these kind of tests for 6 months, 9 months. I know that sounds crazy and ridiculous, but that's what people do, right? So that's what you're going up against. Sometimes that's what it takes. And some students, or people don't care. Like it's not a big deal. Whatever is destined for me, whatever school I go to is totally fine. And that's another totally acceptable way to look at it. You know, you don't, everyone doesn't have to try to get a 1500, but many people are going to try, and that's why the process is extremely competitive. In terms of, you know, different options for preparing for the test, you can study on your own. That's great for motivated students that are self-motivated, can direct themselves. There's a lot of free resources for the SAT, ACT. Then there's group classes. Those are obviously more costly. That those have a huge value, but at the same time, you're in a group, so there's not like the individualized attention that some students need. And then where that comes into play is private tutoring. So that's where, you know, you get more individualized attention and more you know, personalized learning. Okay, so how does the diagnostic testing platform work? So anyone that wants to see that can go to this link that will show what our diagnostic testing platform does. But basically, it's accessible anywhere, so you can do this on your computer. And this is a great, like, okay, I want to prepare for the March SAT. What should I do? You should do this test, and you should continue to do these tests. And what it looks like is this. So it shows you your total score. It shows you your score in each section, and it tells you whether you move from the easy module to the easy module, excuse me, or the hard module. So that's hugely important, and that's just kind of like step one, right? The student wants to know, okay, maybe I need to get a few questions, a few additional questions right on module one to move to that harder module, and then my score will go up. You can see the student did better on the math part because they moved to the hard module. This is more data that we give students when they take this test. So you could see this student didn't do as well in advanced math, which, you know, might be like algebra 2, trigonometry concept, there was a mistake. Algebra, there was a few mistakes, one left out. But problem solving, they did well, right? And it shows easy, medium, and hard questions, how the student did. So they made one careless error on easy question, or maybe they just didn't know a concept, a few wrong in medium questions, then one more wrong on the hard questions. And then really, this is the huge added value that this gives you. So it gives you the time that you took, what other people took. So you could see if you're kind of around the average time, or maybe you took too long, the subtype of the question, the difficulty. And then it gives the answer explanation. So it gives you the question, your answer, the percent that each answer was chosen, the answer explanation, and then in the small box here, follow-up exercise. If you click on that, you can actually do more questions of that type. So say this is a word in context question. I got that one wrong. I want to practice that. I click follow-up exercise, and I can do more questions. So that's a great way to study for an extremely low cost. And then that's not the end. Sorry. I wanted to also show you guys the Blue Book app. So let's see. So basically, sorry, not the Blue Book app. This is a paper version of the digital SAT. So the point of this is, student wants to just like practice questions. They can actually use this to do practice questions. So you can download this for free. I use this with students. I'm using it with them already. It's the same questions. It's just not adaptive because it's on a paper format. Sometimes this is good because, you know, you don't want to, you know, always carry around your laptop, or you want to do questions, you know, on paper, or you just want to do more practice, so you have this at your disposal. So this kind of shows you what some of the questions look like. So basically here, you can see this is the reading and writing section, and you'll see these first 6 questions are all vocabulary-based questions. So you can see it starts out with easier vocabulary: demands, speculates, doubts, establishes. And it goes on to harder vocabulary: repudiates, proclaims, foretells, and recants, right? So you can see the difference in the vocabulary level on some of the questions. The strategy here for students preparing for the test is you want to actually make a prediction for the blank. So basically you're picking which word fits in this blank. So across the whole test, you want to read this first. This tells you what type of question you're dealing with. Here it says, which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase? You can see here, when we get past those questions, it's a different prompt. Which choice best states the main purpose? Then the prompt changed. Which choice best describes the function of the underlined sentence in the text? So you have to look at the prompt first, because if you're just reading this and you don't know what they're asking, you don't know what to look for, right? So the strategy has totally changed, where you have to read this little question stem first to know exactly what the question is asking of you. You can see it keeps changing. Which choice best states the function of the underlined sentence? Which choice best states the main purpose? And there's a poem here, as you can see. Which finding, if true, would most directly support the student's claim? So there's all different types of questions. So, we have strategies for every single one of these question types and an approach for each one. But in a general sense, students need to make sure to read that question stem first before they read the paragraph, so they can, acclimate themselves to what they're actually looking for, right? And it just keeps changing, right? You have some charts. Which choice best describes data from the table to support the researcher's claim? So there you have to use the data from the table to support the claim, and you also have to find the claim. And you can see down here, based on these results, they claim. So that's a key word there that tells you this is the claim. And now I need to find the information here that supports the claim. So I need to think of what would support the claim and what would not support the claim. So there's 2 things I need to do here. Number 1, I need to check, is this information, the answer choice, correct based on this table? And 2, does it support the claim? Right. So this is a little bit, this is why the test isn't easy. It's not easier, right? It's a little bit complicated, and there's some things that students really need to think about. And there's a strategy, and there's an approach, and there's an understanding that can be developed over time by the student to really get this, right? And then you can see later, we're going to go into, we have which choice most logically completes the text. So you have to complete the sentence. And then we have grammar questions, which all have the same stem. Which choice completes the text so it conforms to the conventions of standard English? So here you can see this is a punctuation question. You have a comma, a colon, a semicolon, and a period, right? So there's a lot of strategies and content knowledge that goes into this. And then we continue on, a bunch of those, a lot of these conventions of standard English, about 10 to 12 of those. And then you have at the end, we showed you guys earlier, the note-taking question. So there's a bullet pointed list of notes, and the student wants to present the study and its findings. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? So you want to present the study and you want to present the findings. So the wrong answer choices will just be the study or the findings, and the right answer choice will be the study and the findings, right? So you have to really pay attention to these question stems. Moving on to math, scroll down here. So here you have math questions, and these are largely the same as the old test. You have, algebra questions, word problems, system of equations, graphs, all kinds of stuff like that. And there's tons of strategies that go into this as well. So, overall, the test, there's a lot of, I think one thing we found in going through this, creating this book and creating our courses and all that stuff, there's probably more strategies than ever before, because there's so many varied question types that didn't exist before. So as a student, you have to kind of get used to all this, and it's a little bit challenging, right? So hopefully that was like a quick preview of some important strategies, and kind of just the most important general strategy, which is you have to make sure to read this stem first. Are there any questions about that? I know I just kind of went through a lot of different stuff. I want to just give you guys a minute if there are any questions to kind of type that into the Q&A box. Okay, so we do have a question. Can you super score your SAT from paper to digital? That's a great question. So the answer to that is probably. That's what I've heard. But every college can choose to do whatever they want with test scores, right? They can take them, they can not take them, they can let you super score, they can not let you super score. They can do whatever they want, right? So I think most colleges are going to allow that. That's what I've heard, but at the same time, some may not. But I think the only ones that would not would be very, very, very selective schools. But I think they're all probably 99% will allow that, because that would just be very unfair to the students who are currently in 11th grade. So I think my real answer to that is that they will allow that. And to just kind of go into that for a second, while anyone else has a question, to kind of type that in. You don't have to take the SAT. I'm the first person to say that. At the same time, the negative result of that is that your chances of getting into any one school are going to go down. So obviously, every college loves the marketing they get from the test optional movement, which I'm in full support of. But the net result is that colleges are getting 100,000 applicants. I mean, I literally spoke to a rep from a school at a conference, and he told me that his school, which is a large state school, got 100,000 applicants. So it's kind of hard to be seen in that kind of setting where there's so many applicants when you don't have a score. Because the unfortunate part is they don't just take that as nothing, and that's what I think what they kind of tell people and what everyone thinks. You're missing something, right? So when you're missing something, that's not good for your application, and then therefore your chances of getting in go down. So yes, you do not have to do the SAT. You don't have to send it in to 95% of schools, but at the same time, you have to understand that that's going to affect your score and or affect your your admissions rate or your performance. Some schools even are assigning scores to kids without scores, like they're giving them a placeholder score because that's how their algorithm works that they use, their computer program that helps them analyze students, right? So that placeholder score is not a good one. So there's a lot of challenges for students now, and I think the process is totally overblown. Unfortunately, I think it's sad how intense this has gotten, but at the same time, my job is to just help people put their best foot forward and do the most they can to get in. There's a lot of other factors, right? You have your GPA, you have college essays, so on and so forth. There was a huge article that just came out in the New York Times. It was a big article about the attacks on the SAT. And basically what it said was colleges are having an extremely difficult time analyzing students without test scores because high school GPAs are so inflated. So they're getting thousands of applicants that all have 95 averages. So like, how are they, like, if grades were more realistic and there was people with, it was really, really, really hard to get a certain GPA, then it would be easier for them to do their job without a test. But that's not the case, unfortunately. A lot of schools, and maybe not your school, and that's another thing that kind of is unfortunate. Like maybe my school really grades people very harshly, or I have really hard classes and the teachers are very strict, or I go to a certain school that doesn't give extra credit or bonus points or anything like that, then you feel kind of at a disadvantage. But colleges know what schools do. They know each individual school, they have a profile, and they know if your school inflates kids' grades or they have a lot of extra credit or extra points, and because everyone's applying with a 97 average, and then it becomes very hard for them to evaluate students, so they just fall back on tests, and that's kind of what has kind of happened, is that the colleges are kind of saying, like, we really need this. We don't want to go back to test required because that hurts a lot of students that maybe don't have access to test prep, or they don't have tutor or something like that. But at the same time, it's very challenging for them, and they're also making a lot of money in the process. So that also kind of helps them keep the process the same, right? If they're making tons of money on these applications, and that's good, but at the same time, they've had to increase their staff because they're getting double the applicants, so they have to have double the people reviewing them, or they just have to review them in half the time, right? Those are the only two options. So if they're reviewing them in half the time, they're not looking as closely at your essays and your grades and your course load, and they have to just look more at what's your GPA, what's your test score, so it's a crazy process, unfortunately, but that's why we're here to help and make sure that students and families get the best outcome. Any other questions you guys had? Well, here, so on this last slide here, we have a QR code. So anyone that wants to follow that can get more information on our digital SAT resources. If anyone has any particular personal questions that they don't want to ask in this group setting, feel free to call me. Call the office and I'll, make sure to help you guys, or you can email me. I'll actually put my email in the chat and my number. So if anyone does have any kind of personal questions that they want to ask about their individual student, or if you're a student and you have a question, feel free to give our office a call, shoot me an email, and I'm always happy to help you guys and make sure that you get the most out of this complicated process. And if anyone is taking the upcoming digital SAT and they want more information, or they want some more advice on their particular circumstance, and I highly do recommend people look at it that way. Every student is different, every circumstance is different, and that's where I can kind of like give that more targeted advice to you and kind of guide you guys in the right direction. So yeah, if there's not any more questions, I can wrap it up. But if there's any more questions, I'm going to stay on for another minute or two and just see, of course, answer whatever you guys have. So I'm going to hang out for a minute and see if there's any questions. But other than that, I wish you guys the best of luck on the digital SAT. And of course, if there's anything that comes up, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to help you guys. Thanks.